Chico. Basketball Coaches of the Philippines President, Coach Louis Gonzalez. Got Skills Head Coach Alan Ricardo, and frontliner Christopher Top Juliano.
Webinar series. Sorry, you lost me out there. Am I on now, Teddy?
Yeah, I can hear you, Coach.
All right.
Yes, Coach.
Good evening, attendees. Sorry for that. Some technical difficulties. Again, would like to welcome you to our session for tonight. I'm very excited to have a former NBA coach, and just recently he coached Loyola Marymount, his alma mater, and I visited his practice and his clinic in 2017, and also I met him a long time ago in 2005 at the Big Man's Camp in Las Vegas. So again, joining me tonight is our resident sports psychologist, Teddy Villasor. Teddy, hi again.
Good evening, Coach Royale. Good morning, Coach Mike.
And
Good morning.
yeah. Again, I'd like to introduce to everyone Coach Mike Dunlap. Good evening, Coach.
Good evening, fellas.
So, Coach, just to start things up, what have you been doing lately?
Moving. We lived in LA, so I've just been moving down to a place called La Jolla. It's near San Diego.
Okay. So, I know, like what aside from doing a lot of webinars here and there, what's keeping you busy?
This is a great time for all of us to read and look at film and to catch up where time didn't permit. So just quiet reading and note taking.
Yeah, Coach. There a lot of our coaches or attendees are wondering, or they want to hear, how was your coaching journey? How did you start? So just to give a short background on how you became a coach.
Well, I was a player and I played at Loyola Marymount. And then I had a coach ask me when I was a senior if I'd be interested in being a graduate assistant. So when I was 21, I hopped on that boat and I've been a coach ever since. And basically college, NBA, international. I coached in the National Basketball League in Australia for 3 years. So I've had an international experience and I've coached at all levels, college and pro.
Good. So, Coach, how did you? I know I met you a long time ago with the Big Man's Camp. So, how did you how did you start on that?
Well, the most famous coach with big men work is a guy named Pete Newell. He's passed away, but
yeah,
nonetheless, he attended LMU when he was a young man, and then I was working a camp. And I met his son. And so all of that brought me to the big man camp eventually. And I worked that for 20 years. So whether it was watching Elijah Wan and doing that, to Jabbar, to all the way through to Shaq, and all those guys attended his camp. It was the best big man camp in the world. And basically what they worked on was feet and read and react, and bringing bigs away from the basket. Coach Newell was ahead of his time. And so everything was from the ground up, footwork, and then be able to read and counter and play 1-on-1, 2-on-2, 3-on-3, and then of course go full court. But anyway, I was a part of that for 20 years.
Yes, and I had the privilege of observing that and bringing in Asita Olava and Mark Talan, two of our players from the Philippines at that time. So Ian is joining us for a couple of questions. Ian, fire away.
Hi, Coach. Good evening or good morning there. Okay, so I just have a question. In The Last Dance, we saw how Michael Jordan was as a player. Can you share with us how Michael Jordan was as a team owner?
4 or 5 qualities that stood out. Smart. 2 is directed and goal-oriented. 3 is really efficient with time. He's running a kingdom. He has a lot of other business endeavors. And so when he's in a building or on the move, he's got a lot of people around him. And so he has to be efficient with his time and move fast. 4 was very good with people, friendly, good humility. And then finally, generous. A lot of times that goes missing with MJ is that he's not only generous with his time, and you feel like you've got more time with him than you actually do, but quietly he's done a lot around the United States in terms of donation and making sure that he gives back. And I don't know that he gets enough credit for that.
Okay, thank you,
Excellent.
Coach.
Yeah, Dr. Eddie, you have some questions?
Ian stole all of my questions.
Sorry, Dr. Eddie.
Coach Mike, you spent some time as an assistant coach in Denver with Coach George Karl. Could you share with me a story of Coach Karl that comes to mind that you could share with us?
Well, number one is everybody in the league knew that he was the best off the grease board. Timeouts was one of his specialties. And in the NBA, on pick and roll defense, you roll your schemes or you change your schemes, say that you're getting beat on the pick and roll and you come back to the timeout. And you want to say if you were hard hedging, then you might go weak left or zone it up. And I can remember him always being extremely patient with changing the scheme. And so like you'd be on the bench as an assistant, and you'd say, hey, let's roll that scheme and go to a weak left. And you go, hang on, let's let that thing bleed a little bit and get beat. Let's see if they recognize it. So the story there is that he was always teaching in a very gentle way, but to be patient and let things evolve and don't overreact during the game. Everybody that was in his world understood that he was a very, very good game coach in terms of adjusting and not adjusting too quickly. And also he came from Don Nelson, who was the master of the mismatch. And Coach Nelson had a lot of credit for a lot of things. He was a headlight, not a tail light in terms of innovation. But George Karl was very similar. He was a riverboat gambler. He would take chances during the game. And I think your better game coaches are not afraid to wander from their system or tweak it during the game. And in the NBA, everything's about the mismatch.
Coach, during your time there, you had also two players who really stood out in terms of both personality and their ability in Carmelo Anthony and Allen Iverson. So could you share with us what experience that was for you to be coaching them? What challenges were there?
2 quick stories on both guys is that when AI came in and was traded to Denver, he had come off the heels of the world famous practice that ESPN got him on that soundbite, and he didn't feel good about that. And in his 2 years, just shy of 2 years with Denver, he was never late for practice ever. And when he practiced, he went hard. And so I think there were 2 reasons for that. Number one is he didn't like that he felt misinterpreted in that piece, that soundbite. But 2 is that he was all business when he got in the building. And I just think that, again, that's something that people can't see. He worked at the game. With Melo, I think it was an unbelievable talent. And I think that Melo probably as much as anybody in the game knew where to go and how to score when the money was on the line. And really, really smart player.
Could you give us a quick one also with Kenyon Martin, who was also a part of that squad?
Fiercest competitor that I've ever been around in the NBA. He would rip your head off to win. Highly intelligent, had auditory, photographic memory, if you will. Anything that you said to him, he could recall and then get the order of the words exactly right. So when you did your scouts, he liked a short scout because he was ahead of you and he knew the league so well that I don't know that there's a better defender. Example given, I know that Tim Duncan, when Denver played the Spurs, that would probably be one of his 2 or 3 guys when he went through the door, Duncan, that he didn't want to see Kenyon Martin. Kenyon Martin loved playing against Duncan and loved, the bigger the game, the bigger the star. Kenyon was all about defense and rebounding. And I just love the fact that he was a vicious warrior in the way that he played the game, a heck of a competitor.
Thanks, Coach Mike.
All
Coach
right,
Rial?
yeah, coach. You've always been known as a defensive-minded coach. So, for our attendees, what are your keys to teaching defense?
Well, I think that what you want to do, number one, is think like the other coach and think like how he practices. And when you look at film, look for patterns. And really, a good coach on the other side of the ball defensively is trying to disrupt and break habits so that that team cannot do what they're trained to do best. And so it's all about disruption, in my opinion, in one form or another. You can play very conservative and contain and contest the dribble, but at some point in time, their talent, if it's level with yours or better, you're going to lose. And so you're trying to say, how can I infiltrate that other coach and that system so that the known doesn't beat you? I feel that if you fashion yourself as a defensive coach, you've got to do something different in order to disrupt so that their best players don't get their numbers that night. I always think that it's better to deal with the known than and have the unknown beat you or the lesser player. You can live with that when you leave the floor. But if their best players are able to do what they want to do, then as a defensive coach, you haven't done your job. I think you've got to do some form of disruption. It can be done in different ways. Example given, pick and roll. So if you see that their point guard is one of their top 2 scorers, then you have to make him uncomfortable. Don't give him his right hand. Don't give him his left hand. Push him into areas where he doesn't thrive. If you just constantly are playing back and he can do what he wants and pick you apart, you're going to end up losing that game. So again, I think that some form of disruption is really important in your personality when you go into a game to take somebody out and beat them, because there's nothing better than having inferior talent and beating a better team. And so again, the biggest point, you can get lost in all the points, but I think it's a coach's job to hunt patterns and disrupt as much as possible.
Excellent. Coach, among the, you coach at every level, among the coaches that you have faced, who among us are the hardest, or who gave you the hardest time?
The ones that are unpredictable, that come in and they change their game plans, and they're not afraid to change their game plans. Never minded going up against guys that just, what they stand for. They don't tweak their system. And, during the game, you can tell they're not adjusting out of their timeouts. But the guys that are hard to deal with come in with different little tweaks. They hunt the mismatch. They expose you right away. And like, for example, if you've got a pick and roll in your continuity offense, and all of a sudden you've got somebody down there that is not a very good defender, and they're finding that isolation offensively, say in the first 5 possessions, you've got to say, uh-oh. And like I said, is you on the other end have to make that adjustment. Say, for example, you switch and get caught with a small on a big down low. you've got to get that guy off that better offensive player and switch him out of there. And we call that switching the switcher.
Mm-hmm.
Something like
Yeah.
that as an example, but it's that head coach who's a gambler.
So that
Those guys
very
are tough.
unpredictable. You mentioned your time in Australia. So we had some Australian coach that did webinars with us also. How do you think the Australian basketball differs from American style or from Asian style
Good
or
question.
European style?
Yeah. They're more organized. Australia is the most organized country in the world. And when their kids come out of the womb, they've got structure for them when they're really, really small. And not only is the instruction excellent, but they have a system. So, for example, in Australia, they have club teams, and the suburbs where the kids live, they'll go into their facility where they train, and there's a philosophy of how they're going to train those kids in that gym. And as those kids grow up, they're part of a philosophy. Let's say it's the triangle offense, something like that. Well, every kid's learning the triangle. They had a shuffle offense that was run by a very famous coach that oversaw the country, Lindsey Gaze.
Yeah, Lindsey Gaze.
Yeah, and his son was Andrew, and they called it first and thirds. Well, everybody in the country was running one form or another of that offense. The point here is that there was a philosophy and a way of teaching very young kids. And then finally, competitively, there were games. Those kids could play all day if they wanted to. And, you know, so they were plugged in. And so competition, when a kid was tiny, started. And that's why the Australians have infiltrated the NBA. If you look at the size of their country and look at how many Australians are playing the NBA, there isn't another country in the world that has as many per capita in the NBA than Australia. Your question is excellent because you're saying, well, how did that happen? It didn't happen by luck. It happened by the fact that they're highly organized and their kids start out young, and their coaching is exceptional. So they have seminars. You have to be labeled A, B, C. You know, they've taken the international model and improved it, in my opinion.
Wow! Oh, yeah. And we were we had Australian coaches, and they're very good at teaching the game. And now they've been running this flow offense or the European ball screen offense, which everybody runs. That's what they say, starting with the 12-year-old. There's a debate, coach, about the AAU. So versus the academy system in Europe. What's your take on that?
It's different. You know, it's more freedom. Excuse me. I think that what happens in America is we eat our own. In other words, we're raised on criticism and evaluation. And I think too often that coaches go into a gym and they say, well, we're better here. I wouldn't do that, or I wouldn't do that. I don't have that mindset. What I try to do is go to the Philippines, go to China, go to Australia and say, what do they do best, and jump on that train. I'm not interested in going into, say, Europe and saying, well, I don't like that system. I do just the opposite with my mindset. What do they do best? A long time ago, America's Cup was taken by the Kiwis. And basically the philosophy of New Zealand was, there's a saying, and it goes like this: pick the eyes of the fish out of the fish. And so what the Australians did is they infiltrated America's boats up and down the coast, the East Coast, and got their knowledge. And also they had their own knowledge. And then they brought it back to New Zealand and improved on it. And so getting back to AAU ball in America, I think it has great strengths. And obviously, if you look at flow, and you mentioned that, and the pick and roll, once the Americans figured out that, hey, the pick and roll is a form of fluidity, freedom to a degree, and your best players can operate in that. Then you think about pick and roll. You've got you have to find your best ball handler and your best screener that can score to start out with, because you want those guys to have the most touches by the end of the game. Well, pick and roll creates a set spacing where you can move your defenders out of the way and you can let those two guys go to work. And then you have your role players who on pitch can be there set to shoot the ball or drive it, of course, but you controlled spacing, etc. Well, AAU ball does a great job of flow and pick and roll offense, for example.
Mhm.
And so, again, I'm only going to give you my view of the strengths, because if we go through the whole thing, we'd go nuts. But I'll just leave the answer there. Now, in Europe, when the Europeans played the Americans, they didn't have as many bigs. And so the FIBA, the trapezoid was important because it moved the bigs away from the basket and it changed the angle of the feet. My point is this, is that when I went to Australia and some of the international teams, Philippines, Korea, the smaller teams would come over to Australia and play friendlies, penetration and pitch, they were on it. They were way better than the Americans, way ahead of their time because of necessity. And they didn't have as many bigs. So their perimeters were already playing a perimeter, or their bigs were playing a perimeter game, and they were advanced. So when I looked at that and I was in Australia, I was fascinated with the system of how they taught penetration and pitch and what their keys were. I wasn't interested in saying, well, these guys are small and their coaching sucks. I never felt that way. I felt like in the Philippines, if you really want to learn about penetration and pitch and how to, position your players and create mismatches, I'd go to the Philippines in a second to learn that.
Excellent point. And yeah, you were talking a little bit about ball screens, pick and roll. What's your favorite counter on ball screen? How do you defend the ball screen? If it's a side ball screen or a top ball screen, how do you as a coach, how do you usually defend it?
I'll start with a funnel answer, and like you have a funnel, and my point is that I'll go big and then go to a specific. And by big, I mean in the NBA there are 8 different schemes to defend the side, pro slot pick and rolls, mids or highs, etc. Nobody wants to hear that here. I mean, that's not my point. But the pick and roll on the sides allows your defense to overload. So that's why if you looked at synergy, the majority of people down that, because it's hard to find people on the weak side if you're downing that. And in the guard, the ball has to make quick reads. You can't make slow reads because you can literally go in there and not get punished for trapping the side pick and roll. You're going to get scored on. Every defensive scheme has a downside. And I always say, drink the poison of what you design, because what coaches are famous for is that whoever has the pin last wins. But that's not the way the game's played. But to answer, the quick answer for me is I prefer the down and coming out of timeouts. I prefer something different. When you look at the synergy numbers on the side pick and roll or the high pick and roll or whatever it is, in a timeout, your job is to steal the timeout or not allow that guy, the opposing coach and team, to do what they do best. So they can have 1,000 plays, but ultimately it's going to end up with you having to tell your team how you want that pick and roll defended. I'm going to change it. So if we're downing and we come out of a timeout for 3 passes, we may zone it. And then on the third pass, play man-to-man and get back to your own. That disrupts that timeout, no doubt about it. And so now you're in a 2-3. The coach has spent all his time saying, hey, I want this play. He may get on the grease board and put something new in, so you haven't scouted it. But the pick and roll continuity does not like a zone. It breaks down over time. and there's a weakness to that. But my point is, we're not over there right now. I don't want to get into that. I would just say that it's a coach's job to anticipate what the opposing team's going to do coming out of that timeout, for example. So defending the high pick and roll, it depends on the big. If he's really good at scoring once he rolls down there, then you can play a weak and catch him, or what we call a squeeze, and just defend him. So when he rolls, everybody can stay at home and you go underneath the guard, especially if a guard's only averaging 12 points a game. Now you're saying to the point guard, you score, we're going to hold on to everybody else. And when your big rolls down the middle of the floor, we're going to hold them up. And so we'll show one slide, hold on to the big, and now you're in a squeeze system. My point is, I'm not going to get too technical here, is that with those traits, I would say any good defensive coach has 3 to 4 defensive schemes with pick and roll wherever you're running it that have a sameness to them. So when you're practicing, you're not always changing concepts. Players don't like that. They just want to know how you want things defended. And then with a little bit of a tweak, pushing middle or pushing base, the concepts within what you've been teaching don't change at all. You know, they don't want to know, you know, in a timeout, you want to be very efficient with your words and not confusing. You want to be very clear.
Yeah, there's a lot of talk about how the NBA game has changed over the years, and it's becoming a 3-point shooting game right now. So what's your take on this, Coach?
Well, I think defensively, since we're on that side of the ball, you have to decide who you're going to rotate and who you're not. Because the way the NBA is now, it's built on 3 really, really good perimeter shooters, e.g. 40% or higher. If they're wide open, that shot's going down. And so I think it's really important at who you're going to leave for even a small amount of time and who you're going to tag or stay attached to. I think that's really, really important that you decide that. Now, if I'm out there as a coach, you say, well, how do you do that in practice so that you have the habit of staying attached to shooters and maybe using your 5 and your 1 as your primaries, and you would rotate your 5 if that 1 gets beat or hung up on the screen, but everybody else stays attached. All you have to do is put different colored jerseys on your offense and say, okay, there's a shooter there and a shooter there, and you're gonna stay attached, and or you're gonna stunt, but you're gonna go back to him. And if he gets an uncontested shot, I'm subbing your ass out. You're coming out of the game. In other words, you work through your practices. So by the time you get to the game, there are just certain people you're not going to rotate off of, because at the NBA level, if you rotate a lot, you're going to get beat. So my point is, you have to disguise or camouflage your rotations with either what we call long stunts or short stunts. And it depends on your scouting report and who the shooters are.
Okay, Dr. Eddie, there's some questions on the Q&A. Can you go after them?
Coach Mike, we have one question here. Are you familiar with Kai Soto? He's a Filipino who recently signed with the G League. What are your impression on players skipping college and going this route, the G League?
I think it's a good option for some players. I think that there are some players that don't belong in college academically. For example, they've never had any interest in the books, and a lot of times it's a trick. You know, when you get them into college, you have to fight them every day to get them to class, et cetera, et cetera. And I think the G League provides an opportunity for a young man to develop. The expectations at the G League aren't the NBA, so the pressures are less, but they're still solid. And so from my standpoint, I think if you follow the ponies and gamble on the ponies at all, they say different horses for different courses. And I would say the same thing for young players. For one, that might fit, and for another, let's say, for example, the young man that's going into the G League is not emotionally mature, and he's really close to his family. Now he goes into the G League. He's away from his country, and he's immature as a human being. That's a bad move. I mean, you know, he's going to get eaten up. But there's another young man who has a good emotional temperament. Maybe he's not attached to his family. I think you have to do your homework to see what personality fits. But I do think that there's a big benefit. Let's say, for example, an 18-year-old was terrible at school, and the Philippines came over with a lot of money, and they said, come on over here in the league and play. And that kid's mother, father, brother went over there as his emotional support. That might be a good move for him.
Coach Dindo is asking, could you kindly share a story about Michael KiddGilchrist?
One of the best defenders in the league, very humble young man and physically tough. I met him in a restaurant in Philadelphia when he was 14 years old. And I was sitting with the now president of the Knicks, Leon Rose. And he came in with somebody else in tow. And I was sitting at a table. And the story is his manners. He looked you in the eye. He shook a strong hand, and he asked good questions. And I just thought he was emotionally mature and a very nice human being in that short time that I met him. Then I coached him, and the exact same thing happened. He was guarding LeBron when he was 19. I put him on LeBron, etc. I knew that it would be a mismatch, but it was, you know, he was competitive. He was a fierce, physical presence. And it's no surprise to me he's lasted in the NBA because he's a specialist. He's a defensive specialist, and he's one tough human being. But my story is that nice at 14 in terms of how you carry yourself and classy transfers into when you're 20 to 30 to 40. I just thought that the story there was that he was raised the right way by his parents.
Coach, I always felt that you had a very successful season when you were with Charlotte, considering the year before that they were going through a very difficult situation. How did you bring out the best in that young group? And what were your goals going into each game?
Well, thank you for saying that. I felt going away for everybody out there, I got fired after a year because they wanted it. The target was 29 to 30 wins. And we tripled the wins. We got to 21. They had 7 before. And when we got in there, it was a mess in terms of the culture, the locker room, for example, and just the effort levels in practice. So number one is that we stayed with the young guys. They had some older contracts. They had some guys who had, that were beyond their years. That they were carrying those contracts. This is what every coach does. So that's no one's fault. It's just the way it is. But the reason we were successful from my vantage point and came down the backstretch strong and won games, and that's really hard to do in the NBA at the end because everybody wants to let go of the rope when you know you're not going to make the playoffs. But the point was keep playing the young guys, and I kept playing the young guys. Number 2 is keep it simple, and we kept it simple for the young guys and didn't put in a lot of plays and things like that so that Kemba and Bismack, Gerald Henderson, those guys were young, that they weren't confused. Number 3 was just keep the communication going, even though I'm more direct with people in the NBA than some would like. There's a lot of politics there, but I don't regret being direct with certain players that they weren't going to play a lot. Example given, Ben Gordon. I wasn't going to play Ben Gordon a lot, and I told him to his face, and I didn't. And so I think that having direct communication is really, really important, and be consistent with your communication and stay the course. And so those were a couple elements that we tried to do.
Coach, Kemba Walker is now one of the top players in the NBA. Can you share with us some of your experiences coaching him when he was in Charlotte?
Who's that?
Kemba Walker.
Oh, the most receptive human being that I ever coached in my career, open-minded. Number 2 is the best balance of anybody that I saw in the NBA. You could hit him any way you wanted. He was like a cat. He would always land on the balls of his feet. Well, that came from when he was a young man. He used to be a dancer, and he used to dance in Harlem at a place called the Apollo. And he had unbelievable balance, great legs. 3 is adaptable. He was highly intelligent, could remember anything that you told him. And so he was adaptable. Number 4 is likability. When he went into the locker room, his respect was at a 10 because he worked hard. He was non-threatening, and he knew how to deliver a message to get somebody to do what he wanted to do. I was at St. John's as an assistant coach when he ran the table with UConn, and it was the greatest 5 days of performance of anybody that I ever saw play for 5 days straight. He led them to a Big East championship. And there were like 3 of 5 games or 4 games where he hit the winning shot. I mean, he's that human being. And so when the Celtics got him, I thought they were getting somebody that would be extra special in the locker room.
During your time with Denver, much of the attention were on Allen Iverson and Carmelo Anthony. So, can you share with us the impact of Marcus Camby on that team?
Marcus Camby was a defensive anchor. The thing I remember about Marcus is coming down the floor, you could steal signs and you could tell by the sets what another team was going to run, whether it was San Antonio, it could be the Knicks, it could be the Warriors. It didn't matter. Coming down the floor, I never saw a player pick the signs from the opposing coach of what play was coming next. And Marcus would tell us as we were coming down the floor what action, like let's say they're running a zipper action with a mid pick and roll, and he could call that play, and he would call out defensive schemes before the play the other team could get into their set or their flow. He was unbelievable, high intelligence. Number 2 is best shot blocker in the NBA at that time. So he would cover a lot of mistakes. So if somebody made a mistake and somebody was dribbling downhill, Camby would ultimately alter the shot or block the shot. So that was number 2. Number 3 is great with rookies. I can remember we had a guy named Akuba Dewara. He was from Pepperdine, and he came in and he didn't know what day it was, let alone what the NBA was all about. A beautiful young man. But Marcus would take him out to dinner and set him up with clothes, bought him some clothes, et cetera, et cetera. And Marcus was all about team. Marcus was a great, great teammate.
Coach, in your opinion, who's the best coach in today's NBA? From Coach Ezequiel Valles.
That's a loaded question because wherever you stand, you may not have the knowledge of what another coach is doing. And part of that criteria, I mean, you have to have a criteria. That's like arguing who's the greatest player of all time.
Mm-hmm.
You have to, because if you eliminate championships as part of the discussion, it changes the person that's going to sit in the throne. Now, that's a politician's answer. What I just gave you, you could say, he's selling out. But I would say that coming out of timeouts and being smart, Brad Stevens has to be mentioned. And if you talk about sideline temperament, Brad Stevens has to be mentioned. He has an unbelievable temperament. I would like to play for Brad Stevens because of the way he treats his players. So I think he's in the conversation. Inspiration, I think far and away that Doc Rivers is one of the most inspiring people I've ever heard talk, coach. But he gets his guys up for games because of who he is as a man. And so I think Doc Rivers on inspiration has to be there. You can't miss this and not mention Popovich. I mean, not only is he knowledgeable, but he's the kind of guy you would want to go to war with. And he's created a culture over time. He's done it with different players, is that he's got to be in the conversation. I mean, those are three guys that, kind of stand out. Now, another guy that you have to bring forward is Phil Jackson. I mean, different places, player, coach, moves around, and he finds winning. Well, that's no mistake. So you can't go. I mean, he has 11 rings. So if you miss that in this answer, then that he's got to be mentioned. Pat Riley, and you talk about tempo. Think about this. When he was the head coach of the Lakers, they were the best running team in that era. And then he goes over to the Knicks. He assesses their talent, and they're the best grind and slap around, most physical team. But they played slow down basketball, tempo basketball. And so he wore different jackets, assessed his talent. He's got to be in the conversation when you're talking about great coaches. And I mean, it goes on and on, whether it's Chuck Daly. Now, if you take championships out of the conversation in terms of coaching, Don Nelson, every time that innovation comes up, people mention Don Nelson as somebody who got on the big waves and wasn't afraid to try different things. And the second thing about Don Nelson is player relationships. Everybody who ever played for him that I've ever read enjoyed playing for him because of the freedom that he gave his players.
Excellent.
So, I mean,
yeah.
My point is that you have to set the criteria first on what I mean, because now if you want, I mean, I'm a historian of the game. I mean, Red Auerbach's got to be in the conversation. Okay, you say, okay, this day and age, I just think there are a lot of young coaches coming up that are evolving in a way where Mike Budenholzer, he sat on the bench with San Antonio, and it took a long time for Mike to get to Atlanta, to get to Milwaukee. But I think, on this day, he's one of the better coaches in the NBA without question. Just, he has a tremendous feel, but he earned his spurs, so to speak, pun intended. But he did because he sat there next to Popovich for 20 years. And so he learned his trade the right way is the best way for me to say it.
There's more questions, Kevin. Can you facilitate,
One
please?
of our viewers is asking, what do you think of zone defense and junk defenses?
I love them. I zone defenses and junk defenses. Hubie Brown said this. He said, whenever you're going to do something different and you want to sell it to a high-end player or the pros, number the amount of possessions when you're trying to get them to buy into what your junk is or what your change of defense is or a zone. Now in the NBA, if you're going in, I don't care what team it is, the Warriors, it could be the Spurs or whatever, just tell them you're going to do it for 8 to 12 possessions and you're going to mix it up here and there coming out of timeouts. They'll buy it. They'll do it, especially if it works. But my point is that shrink it and sell it by just saying, hey, we're only going to do this X amount of times. And then most reasonable people will go with you on the sell of that. But I like the zone and I like a change up here and there. I think it's good for the game. I think it's good for your players, and it's investing in the unexpected or unpredictable. I think that's important that you have that as a coach in your toolbox.
So Arwin has a hypothetical question for your coach. If you were to choose between Kawhi Leonard and LeBron James, who would you rather have as a player and as an opponent?
For what type of I'm sorry, I missed the question. As far as the
Who would you have between LeBron and Kawhi Leonard?
and Kawhi?
Yes.
Oh, I would say that all around for me, Kawhi, for a certain type of victory and or let's say posting up, LeBron, no question. He can run the point out of the post. He can run the point from the top. And if you said just his ability to pass the ball better than Kawhi's, and Kawhi's perfectly fine, but he's not LeBron like that. If you want to create the criteria of championships, LeBron's got one more than Kawhi, I think. But again, different horses for different courses for me. But again, Kawhi's legacy is he's on the cusp of solidifying himself at that next level of being a superstar for all generations. He's got one more step to take. LeBron's already in that chair.
Okay, Coach. Ezekiel is asking, if the NBA playoffs start today, who do you think would win the championship?
I think at that time, who was the hottest team going? The Lakers are in the conversation, no doubt about it. They were hot, and they were figuring some things out and starting to really rock and roll. The Clippers got hot. If you look at the last games before the shutdown came, the Clippers were in that conversation. The one that I think a lot of people were sleeping on was Toronto.
Yes.
And I think they had a vapor to them, and they were quietly over there. Once Leonard left, I think people left them for dead. And I think that they just had an aura about them. I would pick them out of the East for me, and I would pick the Lakers ultimately out of the West. And I think the Lakers would have won it.
Okay, Coach. Leo is asking, during your stint as assistant coach of St. John, do you remember a player named Justin Brownlee?
Very, very well. Yeah, I know Justin.
It's very popular here, Coach, in the Philippines, and we're naturalizing him as a Filipino.
That's a great thing. Tell Justin I said hello. I remember him.
What can you say about his game? Just
smart, versatile, really smart. Could score naturally. Unrealized potential at the time. I mean, he had a higher ceiling. He was going to get better. He was one of those guys that was positionless before positionless became a fashionable word. And he had a knack. The thing about the pro level, whether it's the Philippines, the NBA, or Australia, or Euroball, is that when the money's on the line, you need guys that can score. And Justin was one of those guys that you didn't have to diagram and play, and all of a sudden he would do something where you went, oh my God. And he was one of those guys. And the other thing is he's a good teammate. Guys in the locker room like Justin, he never had a bite to him. He just knew how to go along to get along with people. So I like that about him.
Coach, we mentioned how the game has changed offensively, but after watching The Last Dance, is it more physical, the defense before as compared to now?
Yes, more physical. And the other thing is, if you look at trends, the static pick and roll is not as much. In other words, people are using misdirection to get to the pick and roll, and there are a lot more slips, and there are a lot more handoffs because they happen faster. The game is still speeding up. And, say 10 years ago, the pick and roll, they were what I call dead sets. So you have a 1-3-1, you have a 3 flat, you have a loaded set, and then here comes the action. Now there's more movement or flow, and the trend is to get out of your pick and roll a lot quicker, whether you're popping or rolling and doing tricks with your replace man. You don't always lift them. Sometimes you overload them and bring them to the strong side, and then the rescreen happens. So if you look at the trends on synergy, international coaches, NBA coaches, college coaches are doing different things with the pick and roll.
Okay, Dr. Eddie, there's more questions, and of course, you would love to ask your question.
We, Coach Mike, we have 2 more, and I guess mine. There's another one. Coach Tad is asking, in your opinion, Coach, who do you think is the GOAT, the greatest of all time?
For me, it's Jordan with the criteria of the playoffs and undefeated. So if that criteria is in there on championships and then getting to the finals and, never getting to game 7, he's definitely up there. If you're going to go to without championships as part of the criteria, the one that's missed all the time in the conversation is Wilt Chamberlain. And I just asked people for a second in this audience to think about this. They created a vertical plane from the free throw line because of Wilt Chamberlain. It's because he was using a rocker step in his day. You could have 1 foot outside the top of the key and take 1 step to shoot your free throw. And he was planning behind the free throw line and dropping the ball over the top of the rim. He could take a quarter off the top of the backboard. When he played street ball, when he was coming up, he could vertically go up and take a quarter off the top of the backboard. I mean, when you're talking about that kind of athleticism and how he changed the game just on that criteria there. But if you're going to keep championships in and he's forgotten because their memory's only as good as when ESPN started, is Bill Russell. I mean, 11 championships, 2 NC2A championships, a gold medal. Nobody has his resume, not Jordan, not anybody. And then people say, well, it's not fair to compare eras. That's not my point. My point is create the criteria, and Bill Russell's a part of that conversation. Everybody says Kobe, LeBron, Jordan. Well, I would put Russell in any era, any time, any place, and he's got to be a part of the conversation because of his pedigree. And everybody that ever saw him play knew that while he was 6'9", he had 7'6" arms. I mean, he could block anybody's shot, and he could run all day and all night. And also, as he was all about team, and everybody that knows him knows that he's one of the smartest human beings that ever played the game. Very, very smart human being. And so my point is, you have to create the criteria, then have the conversation. Don't just randomly have the conversation and give the GOAT to Jordan just because that's what people's memories are. I think you have to be a historian of the game, because they're players that need to be a part of that conversation.
I'm a Laker fan, so I'll go with Kareem.
Right. And Kareem changed the game. But I understand why you're saying that. And again, everybody's making an assault on the most points scored in the game. But on this day, Kareem is sitting in that throne. And I doubt very seriously whether LeBron will last long enough to take that chair. I'll say that right now. I mean, and also is he, the one shot that he created as a trademark, he didn't invent it, but he took it to the next level, was the hook shot, and nobody could stop that shot. And so again, if you look at Kareem and his college career and his career in the NBA, I mean, it makes for good conversation.
Yeah, he should have been the hands down college player of the year. College player of all time, but for some reason they voted Jordan.
Well, yeah, but Jordan didn't win as many championships, so I guess that wasn't part of the criteria.
Yes.
The other thing is that when Jabbar was coming up, they made him sit out a year. Because he didn't get to play his freshman year. They would have won that with him being the MVP. Then they took the dunk out of the college game because of Jabbar. So they didn't have any rules that were changed because of Jordan. None. And so my point is that when you're talking about Chamberlain and you're talking about Jabbar, and then people have to go to the rule book to take their physical advantage away, that's special. Jordan never had that as a criteria. My point isn't to put one player down to advance another player. I just think that instead of people handing over the GOAT to a guy, I think that there are a number of players that need to be in the conversation. That's all.
Yeah. Thank you,
Thank
Coach,
you.
for answering.
Thanks, Coach. Coach, what will be your advice to all the coaches that are affected during this pandemic, aside from the ones who are attending our webinar now? General
Do what you
message.
guys are doing. Zoom, study the game through film, study the game through conversation with other coaches. Keep asking questions. Like, for example, 5 qualities of this pandemic and dash a good coach is a coach that has great questions and is curious and doesn't think that his way is the best way. Number 1. Number 2 is knowledge is really important. You can have the town drunk who is awful in all areas, but if he's the best surgeon in the world, you're going to let him probably operate on your kid if there's a brain injury. In other words, you have to be competent to develop trust. You have to be able to be good, really, really good, and that is knowledgeable. 3 is be a great listener. I think, we talk about the ingredient of a coach to be able to convince, sell, communicate. I agree, but the biggest and most important part of communication is listening, and the ability to ask great questions and be curious for your entire life, and never think that you're the smartest guy in the gym. That's a fallacy. So I think that you've got to be that, and then to be labeled a player's coach. And it doesn't mean that you have to go eat and drink with them. It just means that there's a respect that they know that you're not living a hypocritical life, for example, or that you'll suffer with them. But being a player's coach is a true compliment. And I think that Popovich is as hard on his players as anybody in the NBA, but he's known as a player's coach because he has an uncanny ability to, once he's outside the lines, to connect with his players about other things in their lives. So I think that it's really important. And then the final ingredient would be, when the game starts, what's your temperament like? I've seen some great practice coaches and some coaches that are really knowledgeable, but they're too tight during the game, and they're constantly yelling and sopping wet and all of that. I'm not much for that. I think you've got to have a sideline temperament like Brad Stevens. I think that's a good goal.
Excellent, Coach. Excellent. I know we have 2 minutes before we let you go. You're busy with transferring stuff, but there's 3 more questions. Ian, please facilitate.
Ezekiel is asking, Coach Mike, how do you deal with disrespectful players?
I think you have to deal with it right away. Don't let it go on. And ultimately, the game is what they want. But if you have a certain code, jump on it right away. Don't allow it to go on and on and on. If somebody's late, there got to be consequences for actions. So if you have a disrespectful player, the first most important thing is to communicate with your management and those people that you're bosses and say, this is who I am and this is how we're going to deal with it, and get them on board first. Second is have consistent consequences for actions, whether it's a fine, whether it's removing them from the practice so that they're not a distraction and you can go on with your practice, because ultimately that's going to cost you championships, the game, your job, if you don't handle that disrespect. You can't have it.
Dindo is asking, Coach, can you share with us some of your experience with Coach Lute Olson?
I worked for Coach Olson for a year. And during that time, he was really smart. Number 2 is really kind to people. 3 is classy. When somebody told him something he didn't want to hear, or something happened with a disrespectful player, he knew how to be firm with that player, but he delivered his message in a respectful way. And then a giver. He was on more committees in Tucson and for the state of Arizona. He gave back to the game. So he was a giver. So those are 4 qualities that jump out.
Coach Mike, what is your coaching philosophy, And what are the things you teach your players besides basketball?
Coaching philosophy would be offensively read and react. Make sure that your spacing is good and respacing is good, but move and counter offensively. And then 3 is make sure that your best players get the most shots. How you do that is your business. And then finally, shot balance. Whenever any shot is taken, you have to decide how many players are going to be back, and they've got to be back every single time so that you're not giving up easy baskets, layups on the other end, and allowing a team to run on you. Defensively, it would be pressure, stunting, dash, rotation, and then rebounding. Dealing with players off the floor, find out what their interests are and ask questions about those things that interest them and not you, so that you're stepping into their world. And whether it's music, whether it is a birthday of their daughter, whether it is their father passed away, their mother, you have to ask personal questions to let them cross the bridge, to let them know that the most important thing is their life. Because once they know you care, they'll care about you, the team, etc. But you've got to cross that bridge every day and ask them different things.
Thank you, Coach. As a final question, Coach, I know having coached for a long time, how do you deal with the ups and downs in coaching?
I think that you have to understand that there's another job if you want to be a coach somewhere else. And I think too many coaches get themselves in corners, and so the loss becomes devastating and the victory becomes too important. I think that, you got to say how long you want to be in the game, and don't let the game or management threaten you in a way where your behavior you take it out on your players, your staff, or you act like an idiot during the game. I think that, I think the most important thing is that an old coach taught me a long time ago. He said, Mike, if you want to stay in a nice hotel, do so and enjoy it. But don't stay there your whole life, because coming down, you're too used to the good life. And I think that your temperament, when you don't make much of yourself, that you'll mop the floor no matter how old you are, and you'll wash the balls, you'll do whatever. Don't make yourself too big for the game, because the game is bigger than you, and have fun with it. I think that you can tell that the coaches that are enjoying coaching the game, and when the scoreboard is your only answer, it'll be a cruel life for you, because if you travel and you coach, you're going to get your ass handed to you at times, and it's just the way it is. But if you treat it like life and death, you're going to get burnt out and whatnot. I think you've got to just understand there's another job, another place for you, and don't panic.
Excellent, Coach. And I'm sure a lot of coaches will learn from that. And, again, Coach, would like to thank you for your time. I know you're busy transferring, but you gave us an opportunity to get to know more about you and pick your brain on certain topics. And hopefully we can have you back in the future. Any parting words?
Yeah. Make sure that you tell Ricardo Brown I said hello. He was at Pepperdine and I was at LMU and he was an unbelievable college player. And I know he had a great career over there, basketball wise and all of that. But my connection to the Philippines goes through that, is it understanding who he was, and then seeing the Philippine basketball community get to a high level of respect over here. Just keep doing what you guys are doing. I know you're basketball fanatics. You're good people, and you're doing it. You guys are doing it the right way. So just keep doing it. It's awesome. So take care.
Thank you, Coach, very much.
All right. Bye-bye.
Again, to our attendees, our next session will be on Friday. We'll have 3 sessions on Friday. We'll have 6 p.m. With Mr. Excitement. Bong Alvarez will join us at 6 p.m. Doc Teddy is quite excited about that. So he's Mr. Excited and with Mr. Excitement. Okay. And then that's no pun intended. Uh, and then at 8 p.m. we'll have Coach John Bryant, who's an assistant coach, player development coach of the 76ers. So that'll be interesting of how he was able to help Joel Embiid with his post game. So it's going to talk about the player development in the NBA. And then the last is an Italian coach, Francesco Nani, who will be joining us at 10 p.m. So we have a full session on Friday, and we might have an online auction as a follow up to our session or to our fundraiser for freelance coaches. So again, we ended the online auction for the frontliners, and we were very thankful for that. And we had our first session, which was very successful also. So we'll have some follow-ups on that, and we'll have also the 1 hour session with Doc Teddy Villasor. So the private session with Doc Teddy Villasor, which will be bidded out also on Friday, or if we will have time. Okay. Again, thank you, Doc Teddy, Ian,
Thank you, Coach. Thank you,
Balete,
Doc.
for joining us, and to our attendees. Thank you so much for joining us every time we have this webinar. I know there's some groups that have started their own webinars. Please support those coaches also that started their webinars, as we're all growing this game. Coach Louis Gonzalez and Coach Alan Ricardo started their webinar, so just stay in tune for that in their Facebook pages with Gut Skills and also with BCAP. And we're so happy that everyone is into this learning, and for those coaches who have reached out to us, just a bit more, give us a bit more time. I'm still collecting those winning bids. Those that haven't paid for their winning bids, please do so. Please email Coach AV at hoopcoaches.com. For those that we haven't delivered, especially those provincial, for the third straight day, LBC did not pick up from my place. But I can show the text message that that their customer service has been asking me if their pickup was able to pick up the items. But unfortunately, this is the third day in a straight that nothing happened. So if you know any other forwarder that can forward during this ECQ, please help us. And also for those coaches that won the bidding from the provincials, please bear with us also. And we couldn't really control the situations with the shipping. But for most of the Metro Manila and nearby provinces like Cavite, we're able to give out the winning bids for that auction. Again, it's part of helping, and we're really glad that we are on this together to help our fellow coaches that are affected by this pandemic. Again, Doc, anything you'd like to add?
Just to all of our winning bidders, just be patient with us. Your stuff is on the way, and we're doing everything we can so you guys can get it.
All right, so you'll have that smile that Coach Ian has because he received the shoes already because he's
Oh.
just from Mandaluyong. So bear with us, Bong, bear with us. Dindo, of course. But Dindo Patricio says he'll be more patient because he's gonna bid more. So he's not really waiting on the. He's not really keen on receiving his this early. So thank
Yes,
you,
he's getting
Dindo.
the bigger
More
box.
It's from Nueva Vizcaya, Dindo, right?
Sulit natin yung box niya.
Yeah, sulit yung box mo, and I promise to give him a polo shirt from Blackwater because of his patience. See, Leo Arrigue also next reporting. Okay, thank you so much again. Stay safe, guys, and some of the coaches have reached out also to me personally, and they're resellers of the mats I'm selling. So if you want to resell them, it's also a way to earn some living without really having a capital. So I gave them a very good reseller's price, which is higher than what I will earn personally. So if they're able to sell, I'm happy for them. And we have the last 2 days. And then thank you also for the
lost you for a
coaches.
second. The last two what? Sorry, we lost you.
What's that?
Yung sabi po ninyo, last two and then we lost you.
Distributing those mats to the coaches that reach out to yours truly to be resellers, because I posted on the page that resellers are welcome. So if you want to resell, go ahead. If you want to refer customers to the disinfection service, go ahead. So, and you can be earning while we'll just with those players or those parents. Usually it's the parents that they're coaching that they that we delivered to. So but it's a way of helping, and let's help each other, and that's good for them to have some extra income. All right. Thank you. Again, good night.
Thank you. Good night po.
Stay safe. Bye-bye.